Good morning. In this lecture video, I will discuss on the basic differences between aside, monologue and soliloquy, and then I will take three particular soliloquies from Macbeth and describe on the importance of these soliloquies on the concept on the construct of the text. Somehow, you know that whenever we deal with the essential patterns of drama, that is the patterns of dramaturgy, we find that there are three particular terms, or we encounter three particular terms that come readily in front of us, and these are number one, aside; number two, monologue; and number three, soliloquy. So the question is, what are the basic differences between these three? In all cases, you find that in case of aside or in case of monologue and also soliloquy, the speaker is single, but somehow their implications, their differences are altogether being present. Say, for example, when we think of aside, that is the aside comments, we find that there are other characters, there are characters on stage, other characters being present on stage, and somehow the speaker who speaks the aside comment, the speaker who utters the aside comment or makes that aside comment, he is being separated from the other personalities on stage, right? So in a modern technique, as we find that a spotlight is being fallen on him, or maybe his face is being lit, right? And somehow at the background we can find somebody speaking by using microphone, and we can hear to his thoughts, or maybe the other persons have been made, say, freezed on stage, and now we can hear his words. But in the ancient form, somehow we find that the aside comments were made by the persons, and somehow he was separated from the other characters on stage by making him separate from others. That means visibly separating from others. He comes to the front stage, or maybe the front corner stage, and then he speaks something by looking at the spectators, and where we can find that the other characters were muted to some extent because they are not being considered as audible, right? So this is the aside comment. So why aside comments are important? Because you can find that in the aside comments, somehow the character expresses his mind, right? That means whenever we find that the characters are discussing with each other or conversing with each other, generally we find that the characters do not express their own minds, what they actually feel. So in that particular form, the language doesn't refer to a medium of communication. It indicates the evasion of communication, right? And in case of aside, why aside comments are important, as I'm discussing just now, that through the aside comments we can get a proper glimpse of the character. That means what he thinks, what he schemes, what he constructs within his mind, or something like that. The other two terms, that is monologue and soliloquy, these are very intricate, these are very complex to differentiate. You know that all the soliloquies are monologue. Because the speaker is single, because monologue signifies that whenever a person speaks singly, you see that there are no other characters present with him. So in that particular form, soliloquies are also monologue. But the difference, why all monologues are not soliloquies, it is because of the particular fact that in case of soliloquies, we can find that there are some grave and philosophical, or maybe a kind of a knowledge gathering informations have been shared. So somehow the monologues are general conversations, monologues are general comments made by a single speaker, but somehow in case of soliloquies we find that these are exposing the the fundamental ideologies, or maybe some philosophical doctrinations in altogether. What M.H. Abrams say, I'm reading from M.H. Abrams, A Glossary of Literary Terms. Under the subheading Soliloquy, M.H. Abrams writes, soliloquy is the act of talking to oneself, whether silently or aloud. In drama, it denotes the convention by which a character alone on stage utters his or her thoughts aloud. Playwrights have used this device as a convenient way of conveying information about a character's motives, okay, number one, states of mind, number two, or for purposes of exposition, and sometimes in order to guide the judgments and responses of the audience. And now he exemplifies Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, performed in 1594, opens with a long expository soliloquy and concludes with another which expresses Faustus's frantic mental, emotional condition during his belated attempts to escape damnation. The best known of dramatic soliloquies is Hamlet's speech, which begins, "To be or not to be." We know that. He differentiates soliloquy from an aside comment. Here he says, a related stage device is the aside, in which a character expresses to the audience his or her thought or intention in a short speech, which by convention is inaudible to the other characters on the stage. Both devices, common in Elizabethan and later drama, were largely rejected by dramatists in the later 19th century, when the increasing requirement that plays convey the illusion of real life impelled writers to exploit indirect means for conveying exposition and guidance to the audience. Okay, so that is the thing that here M.H. Abrams is trying to point. Somehow M.H. Abrams is also, he is not mentioning the term like monologue, right? So the difference between monologue and soliloquy, as I've just just mentioned, that soliloquies deal with the graver philosophies, the deep thinking process, you see, okay? All these things have to be taken into consideration. In Macbeth, somehow, we encounter different monologues and soliloquies by Macbeth. For the very beginning, we can find that when the witches are stating Macbeth, witches are commenting on Macbeth's identity. They say that, Thane of Cawdor, Glamis, and the king hereafter. And when Ross comes and says Macbeth that, oh, all hail Macbeth, you see that. And he is also referring to the same indication that Macbeth has been made by Thane of Cawdor, by Duncan. Somehow, there Macbeth says, you see, that the supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me the earnest of success, commencing in a truth? If good, why do I yield to the suggestions, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? So these are somehow a kind of a conflict. It's a conflict-generating words, conflict-generating terminologies that Macbeth is implicating there, and somehow these are the to some extent, these are the aside comments. It is referring to Macbeth's own thought processes. In this lecture, I will take 3 different soliloquies that Macbeth has uttered in the text, and somehow their implications and what it deals with, and how so far these are important to the construction of the play Macbeth, and how so far these are important to the construction of the psyche of Macbeth, that is the psychological part, obviously. The first one is described in Act 1, Scene 7. Please open Act 1, Scene 7 from Macbeth. And there is a particular reference. I'm reading from that, and I will discuss some of the sections of this soliloquy in detail. In Act 1, Scene 7, there is Macbeth alone. It's enter hot boys and torches, enter a sewer, and divers servants with dishes and services, and pass over the stage. Then enter Macbeth. Macbeth is alone. He is completely alone on stage. Macbeth says, if it were done when it is done, then it were done quickly. So these are very riddling terms, you see. If it were done, when it is considered to be done. When it is done, when it is suggested, when it is being thought of. then it were done quickly. So you can identify that these particular terms, the it, these are Shakespeare is deliberately projecting these particular pronouns in place of he's using it. You see, somehow these are signifying the murder of Duncan. Why Macbeth is not using the term? Probably because he was also suffering from the anxiety. When he is alone, he also, it is not in front of any other persons, but still Macbeth cannot utter the term murder. Macbeth cannot utter the term murdering Duncan. Why? Because it is his conscience that is speaking each and every moment. So therefore he says, if it were done, when it is already calculated, when it is done, when it is decided that it were well to be done quickly, so it must have to be resulted in very quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with the Circe's success, but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here. So that means if it were possible that I am killing Duncan and it will end in everything, because after the murder there will not be any further complications to be aroused within my mind, within my conscience, within the situations, you see. So be all and end all here. But here, upon this bank and shore of time, we would jump the life to come. So there is the philosophical question that Macbeth is trying to suggest. At one particular section of this text, the witches utter that security is mortal's chiefest enemy. And here also you can find the same thing, that we always think about future. You see, Macbeth is always thinking about future. He is not grabbing the present and enjoying each and every moment. Rather, he is thoughtful. He is very much thoughtful about the future. So therefore he says that, but here upon the bank and shoal of time, we would jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here. That we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. That is the poetic justice that Macbeth is trying to project here. He says that in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. That means it is the poetic justice that if I kill somebody, then it might not be possible. It might be possible that in any moment in the few days ahead, it will plague the inventor. That means it will attack me altogether. That means it is the poetic justice. That means you are causing harm to others and the harm will be done on you also. So that we would teach bloody instructions, which being taught to return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of a poison chalice to our own lips. That means when we are placing the poison chalice to another's lip, that means the person who is in front of me here, it is referring to Duncan. Ultimately, Macbeth is suspicious about the future that is coming to him, because he is considering that even at a moment, even in a minute, it might be possible that the poison chalice will be placed in front of his lips. So he says, therefore, this even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. And then he says, he is here in double trust. Here he is referring to Duncan. As I've already suggested, that this double trust is actually referring to Macbeth's standpoint, you see. That first, he says, he is here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. That means I am going to kill Duncan. And now, the problem is, first of all, I am his kinsman, because Macbeth is related to Duncan. To some extent, Duncan is Macbeth's uncle in a far-fetched relationship, obviously. So first, as I am his kinsman and his subject, you see, because he's a king. And in a typical monarchy, you will find that regicide is considered to be the worst kind of a sin ever possible, because king is considered as the father figure. And if you're going to kill the father figure, and if you kill the person who is directly related to God, then somebody had to be considered as the worst kind of sin ever possible. So he says, therefore, he is here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, because here Duncan is coming to Macbeth's castle. It is Dunsinane. So he is the host here. Macbeth is the host here, and Duncan is the guest. So it is the ultimate responsibility of the host to protect his guests from any kind of impending danger. So that Macbeth actually says here. He is here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the gate, nor bear the knife myself. That means I must protect Duncan. It is not that I am bearing my knife myself and killing Duncan. So it is not possible. It's not right properly. So he is here in double trust. First as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, and then as his host, who should against the murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties, so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet tongue against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity like a naked newborn baby, it's striding the blast and heaven cherubim, horsed up on the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, the tears shall drown the wind. So somehow Macbeth is thinking, his own psyche is always pricking him, his conscience is pricking him, that he is doing a heinous crime against Duncan, because Duncan is meek, Duncan is tender, Duncan is innocent, Duncan is out and out a good man, and ultimately that is why it is pointing that he has been so clear in his great office, that his virtues plead like angels. It will expose everything, you see, and it says that virtues will plead like angels, and it will be like trumpet tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity like a naked newborn babe, because it is indicating towards innocence itself. It is pity. And pity like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast or heaven's cherubim. You see, it's referring to the horses, and when it is flying, the flying cherubim is being pointed out. And striding the blast of the heavens cherubim, horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye. That means it will be made open, you see, that everybody could feel that what has been done by Macbeth, that tears shall drown the wind. And then Macbeth says a very important lines. He says, I have no spar to prick the sides of my intent. Here you will find that Shakespeare is deliberately projecting a particular reference to the metaphor of horse riding. He's symbolically, he's an image of horse riding. What is spar, you know, that when there is a horse rider, you will find that he uses the shoes, and there are some things, okay, just at the heel of the shoes, these are called the spar. Okay, when a horse rider wants to gather speed, he just, kicks his horse with the help of the spur, and it gets the speed. So here, at the reference to this horse rider, he says that I have no spar. That means what I am doing here, what I am going to do here, that means killing Duncan. I do not get anything that can influence me into killing Duncan. So I have no spar to prick the sides of my intention. Here, horse is referring to the intent, but only, that is, except my vaulting ambition. So always we find that what is the typical problematic issue with Macbeth is over ambition, right? So here Macbeth is deliberately describing that I have no spar to prick the sides of my intent, but only the vaulting ambition, which I have already suggested that here is the horse riding, the imagery of horse riding is being conceptualized. Here he says, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. That means when I try to ride the horse, my jump, my ambition guides me. It makes me jump on the horse, and I find myself on the other side. That means I'm falling from the side of the... So therefore he says that I have no spar to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. So it is fundamentally, that is Act 1, Scene 7, it is a particular reference to a soliloquy that is made by Macbeth, and somehow you will find that Macbeth is thoughtful about his present condition. He is to some extent examining his own ideologies, he is examining his positions, he is examining his situation, obviously, and somehow this particular reference, that is the fundamental issue with Macbeth's psyche, the fundamental issue with Macbeth's philosophy, all these things are actually indicating towards Macbeth's troubled considerations here, right? So it is the first soliloquy that is very important. It seems to be important to me. The second one is to be found in Act 3, Scene 1, right? So in Act 3, Scene 1, Macbeth's right. Macbeth says, open Act 3, Scene 1. It is Act 3, Scene 1, line number 48. Macbeth says, to be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared. So here you can find that somehow this particular issue, this particular situation is altogether important to deal with Macbeth versus Banquo. You see that these are considered to be the foil characters with each other. Somehow in this particular text, that is Shakespeare's Macbeth, we find that Macbeth and Banquo, they belong to the same status, right? Because Macbeth is the general and Banquo is altogether, he is being presented or posited in the same status. They both have the courage, but somehow as we are reading Shakespeare's Macbeth, so somehow Macbeth has been projected with more prowess, more bravery and more courage and more power. But somehow Banquo is being treated with the positive traits of the human psyche. You see, from the very beginning, that when the witches are expressing, or witches are, they are prophesying Macbeth in front of Macbeth, it is Banquo who is actually negating their words, right? It is not Shakespeare, it is not, that cannot be done by Macbeth altogether. Why Banquo? As I've already suggested, that Shakespeare is taking his story of Macbeth from Raphael Holinshed's Chronicle. It is the Chronicle of England, Scotland, and Ireland, from where Shakespeare is taking his story of Macbeth. There in the source text, we find that somehow Banquo is being projected as a character who is supporting Macbeth into this action. But here in this text, as I've already mentioned in the first lecture, that Banquo is being projected as a foil character, an antithetical character to Macbeth. Why this is being done? As I've already suggested, that when Shakespeare is writing Macbeth, this is a situation, this is a time when King James I was on the throne, and Banquo is being treated as the forefather of the Stuart dynasty. That's why Banquo is projected as an out and outer good character. And here you can find that Shakespeare is projecting the same. He's referring to that Macbeth fears nobody except Banquo. Why? Because Macbeth is suffering from a kind of moral deprivation. But Banquo is out and loyal personage. Okay, so that's why he says our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared, because it is the typical obedience, you see, it is the typical loyalty that Banquo is carrying. It is much he dares, and to that dauntless temper of his mind he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety. There is none but he whose being I do fear. And then he says, and under him my genius is rebuked. As it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. So here is another kind of an allusion that Shakespeare is taking here. Mark Antony's was by Caesar. Who is Mark Antony? Who is Caesar? Actually, it is referring to Octavius Caesar. After the death of Julius Caesar, the Roman provinces have been divided into three triumvirs. Okay, these are called the three triumvirate. There was one section that is considered by that was under Marcus Antonius, or called Mark Antony. The second one is under Lepidus, and the third one was under Octavius Caesar, who was a child then, right? But somehow Marcus Antonius, regarding Cleopatra, regarding any other issues, regarding Fulvia and also there is Octavia, we find that somehow Marcus Antonius was facing a kind of moral depravity, and somehow Caesar, who was probably 1/3 of his age at the time, in front of Caesar, Mark Antony was morally depraved, and somehow he feared Octavius Caesar, and he fled. Marcus Antonius was the most powerful person, like Macbeth. He fled from the situation. Okay, he fled from the battlefield altogether with Cleopatra, that we find in Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. So similarly, you can find that Shakespeare is deliberately creating a kind of a parallelism between Marcus Antonius and Macbeth, because both are sharing the same prowess, both are sharing the same courage, both are sharing the same power within them. And here it says that, and under him my genius is rebuked. As it is said, Marcus Antonius was by Caesar. He chid the sisters when first they put the name of king upon me, and bade me speak of him. Then prophet-like they hailed him father to a line of kings. So it was the the prophecy that had been made in for Banquo, that he will become the line of kings. As I have suggested here, that it is indicating towards the Stuart dynasty, and when Shakespeare is writing this particular play, the Stuart dynasty is still reigning. So that's why the line of kings without any end. So they hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown. Why it is called fruitless crown? Because Shakespeare is thinking, or Macbeth is thinking here, that somehow if a king becomes a king and without a proper, future generations to become king, so then the crown would be fruitless. So upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren scepter. You see, the fruitless crown, barren scepter, both are referring to the same thing. So upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren scepter in my grip, thence to be ranged with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. Okay? For them, the gracious Duncan have I murdered. That means it is just because to make Banquo's issues king, I have done these kinds of crimes, these kinds of murderings, you see. So for Banquo's issues have I filed my mind. For them, the gracious Duncan have I murdered. Put rancors in the vessel of my peace, only for them, that and mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man, that is Satan. That means I have done the work of damnation, obviously, because I have given my soul to Satan, because I have killed Duncan. So only for them and mine eternal jewel, that is the bliss, you see, that is salvation probably. So only for them, the mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. Rather than so, come fate into the list and champion me to the utterance. So somehow in this particular soliloquy, in this particular reference, we can find that Shakespeare is projecting Macbeth into his own ideologies, into his own thoughts, and he is scheming to kill Banquo and Fleance, obviously, so that his scepter may not be barren. Okay. The most important soliloquy that we have found in Shakespeare's Macbeth, it comes at the end, towards the end of this play, and it is Act 5, Scene 5. Okay, so Act 5, Scene 5, open line number 17, yes? There is a speech by Macbeth. Here we find that Satan is informing Macbeth of Lady Macbeth's death, and the immediate reaction of Macbeth was, she should have died hereafter. So somehow these are very problematic terms that Macbeth is using here. Somehow to Macbeth at this very moment, his moral conscience indicates that he has done a big mistake somehow, and the container of his misery is completely full at this moment. Somehow the death of Lady Macbeth, it couldn't add anything more to him, right? He says she should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word at this very moment, at this very situation. I cannot think anything about them. And then Macbeth says the famous lines, you see, that tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. What it indicates here, you see, that as I've already suggested in the section 1, that is the first soliloquy that I have discussed in this particular video, in this lecture. So there was an indication that we are always thoughtful about our future. You see, as I have already suggested, security is mortal's chiefest enemy. We don't think about the present scenario, see. Always we think about the future. Each and every moment we are trying to secure our future. The question is whether the future actually comes to the forefront or not. Whether future will actually come to us. It says tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace to the day to day from to the last syllable of recorded time. Because you see the rationing is there. You see that somehow everything is certain regarding our future. The future never comes. When somebody was of his childhood, then he tries to secure his youth. When he is in his youth, he tries to secure his life for when he is retired probably. And when he comes to the retirement, he tries to secure the life of his children, right? So somehow the security or the craving towards making the future secure, it's a particular kind of a crisis, it's a particular kind of a problem. And by trying to make secure the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow in this particular form, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. It is creeping with a speedy pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. So it is the actual time period. In midst of different kinds of uncertainties, you see that one thing is certain. What is that? That is death. We cannot avoid death. It is completely inevitable. So by trying to secure our tomorrows, gradually we are moving towards the last day of our life, right? It says, therefore, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps, it is creeping in this speedy pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. So, T.S. Eliot wrote, it's time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. So somehow, at the present scenario, you see, it was future some days before, and it will be past a day after. So somehow it's a continual movement of time that we're in. And when we find that it was or the present has been made our yesterday, we find that we have been befooled. Why? Because we have passed that day to secure our future. And now this is the future where we are residing at this moment, but still we are trying to secure our future. That is the problem, you see. So in that particular form, or in that particular section or structure, we can find that Shakespeare is to some extent indicating, he is expecting or anticipating the typical formation of existentialism, you see. There was a particular myth that is called the Myth of Sisyphus. What it does, you see, that Sisyphus was cursed by or punished by Zeus, Greek Zeus, the Greek god. And somehow Sisyphus has had to roll a stone towards the peak of a mountain. And when he becomes successful in rolling it up, then it flows down, it comes down. And again, Sisyphus does the same. So we are all suffering from the same crisis. We are the living Sisyphus. Why? Because we are doing the same thing again and again, again and again, again and again, but we cannot come to any conclusion, because you see, each our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. So it is the typical existential crisis that Shakespeare is indicating here. He is anticipating here in the Elizabethan age. Out, brief candle. The life is compared with a brief candle. The candle is lighted, you see, and with its lighting, with its illumination, it is gradually, it is to some extent, it is making an end towards its sources or resources. Out, brief candle. It is burning, you see, and it is burning and it is melting. It's all the life forces have been completely making an end. So out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow. It's substanceless. It's meaningless. A poor player. Life is a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. It's the same kind of thing that Jacques says in As You Like It, that we are only the players. We are performing on the stage. So life, we are playing our roles. It struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. So after his acting is over, he will be completely vanished. So that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Life is a tale told by an idiot. It's full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. So this particular kind of a nothingness is at the core of Shakespearean ideology. Now, can you think of the modern formation of dramaturgy? So it is the realization of that Macbeth gets at the end of his life. He finds that what he has done, he always tried to secure his future. He killed Duncan to become the king, right? He dumped all the responsibilities regarding this murder or allegations of murder to Malcolm and Donalbain. He killed Banquo, okay? He killed Lady Macbeth. Each and every moment he's trying to secure his future. He's killing all his ministers who had gone against him. But somehow, what happened to the end? he cannot make his throne secured, right? So it is the fundamental realization. What I'm trying to suggest here, if you think about the typical monarch, typical modern dramaturgy, you will find that there are kinds of plays that are called existentialist plays. Okay, there is another kind of play that have been mastered by the persons like there is Samuel Beckett, there is Eugene O'Neill, Ionesco, and Harold Pinter. These were the persons with whom the theater of the absurd comes to the forefront. You know what is absurd? It cannot give you any, it doesn't give you actually, it doesn't give you any proper meaning, you know. When we come to the auditorium to watch or visualize any tragic spectacle or any spectacle of a drama on stage, we expect a meaning, right? Somehow that particular meaning is negated by the absurdists. Because meaninglessness is the actual meaning of these plays. Why? Because if the life that we are leading on, if the life indicates a meaningless life, then the plays that are focusing on that particular form of life, how can they be meaningful? So as we are suffering from the meaningless life, we are leading a meaningless life. So these plays, the existentialist plays and the absurdist plays, they are projecting to the meaningless plays and meaningless dramas, because the meaninglessness is the meaning of these plays. Silence is the language of these plays. Somehow Shakespeare is indicating them. That means what the modern dramatists, okay, like Beckett and others, as I mentioned just now, they thought in the 20th century, Shakespeare anticipated that particular form in the Elizabethan period or Jacobean period. Somehow that is very significant, that is very important, because Macbeth's realization that is signifying nothing, you see, this nothingness is at the core, and somehow we are also suffering from that. So these are the three soliloquies. There are other monologues which are very important. Dagger Scene, for example, this is a very important one. And I have to discuss about them in detail, obviously. Somehow these three soliloquies can give you an indication of what Macbeth thought, what Macbeth felt, and what Macbeth realized. These are very important regarding the portrayal of Macbeth's characterization, right? So somehow you have to deal with them in detail. And so far as the soliloquies are concerned, I have to tell you that somehow the soliloquies are indicating Macbeth's strengths and weaknesses, whether Macbeth should be considered as a criminal or whether Macbeth should be considered as a hero. Okay, because this is a fundamental question that Robert B. Haleman has treated in his essay Macbeth as a criminal hero, that whether Macbeth can be considered as a hero or Macbeth is considered as a criminal or a mixture of both. So somehow through the soliloquies, when I began this particular lecture, I have mentioned that the soliloquies and asides and monologue, these are very important, referring to Macbeth's, referring to the speaker's psyche, the speaker's standpoint, the speaker's thought processes. So therefore, what do you think that what are the basic traits of this soliloquy? Is it referring to Macbeth's negative aspects of life, or is it referring to Macbeth's realization? Is it referring to Macbeth as a tragic hero who is suffering from to be or not to be crisis, or is it referring to Macbeth as a criminal? So these are the things that we have to discuss on, or we have to think about. And somehow the most important issue that comes to the forefront is the individual representations of these texts, individual representations of these soliloquies. Where in the first soliloquy we find that Shakespeare is thoughtful about the conflict. Shakespeare is thoughtful about what to be done and what not to. That is the to be or not to be crisis that we find as the chief ingredient in a typical tragic hero. In the second soliloquy, we find that Shakespeare is, Macbeth is suffering from, a crisis between himself and Banquo, and somehow this particular soliloquy indicates that what will be done by Macbeth in future. In the last soliloquy, that is the to be or not to, the signifying nothing soliloquy, you say tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace to the last syllable recorded time, etc. This particular soliloquy, we find that Macbeth is very much thoughtful regarding his own resolutions. You see that he had got the knowledge about everything, he had got the resolution, he had got the basic implications regarding his own life, his own understanding. And when we enter an auditorium to see watch any particular dramatic spectacle like tragedy, we have to get that particular knowledge. Okay, so it is a kind of a realization that we gather from the soliloquies, and how so far the soliloquies are important regarding the characterization of any tragic hero like Macbeth. Okay, so today up to this. Thank you.